Hey team, welcome to a new video here on NIMS Tech. Today we're going to be talking about getting started with capacities and just going through all the different features, the settings, and kind of playing around with the system and showcasing what it is that you can do. I created a video for this back in my original channel for Obsidian, like how to get started in Obsidian. And a lot of people have asked me about how they could get started in capacities. There are a lot of resources on PK Beth and the Capacities team's official YouTube. So I will leave those linked down below, but I figured that I would make my own video so that I could direct some of my friends whenever they ask me this question. So I am going to go ahead and insert a clip of creating an account because I am going to be using a new account. This is not my main system. I'm using a free account for those of you who are interested in trying this out without necessarily having to pay for it. So we're going to be going through this getting started project with a free account, and we're going to be doing it on browser as well. You can download the app and have that on your computer locally, but we're going to be doing it on the browser so you can see that that is an available option to you. That being said, at the end of the video, I will jump into my own account so that you guys can see and I can show you a little bit about the pro features and talk a little bit more about that. I have already, from what you can see on screen, I have deleted all of the objects that get created whenever you create a new account on Capacity. So as soon as you create a new space, there are kind of like these initial objects that get created. I have deleted all of those so that we can kind of go through the process one by one. And I'm going to go ahead and insert a clip here of where I did that from a different session. Getting started with capacities is really, really simple in the sense because a lot of the onboarding is done so that it allows you to understand the system very, very well. And because it's different from Obsidian in that you don't have to do a lot of initial build outside from building your objects, the actual structure is in place so that you don't have to think so much about that. You can focus on whatever objects it is that you want to actually create. So as you can see, there are pre-filled objects in here. You can delete all of them. So you don't have to keep them if you don't want to. I believe that when I first set up my system, I did delete all of them because I'm ridiculous like that. But you don't have to, of course, but I did. Going here into this getting started section, there is this getting started video by Capacities that you can watch. It is about a year old at this point, so there may be some things that are not reflected in here because the Capacities team is constantly providing updates, but it could be a good place to start. Of course, there's also my video. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark that, create your first object. We will do that now. So I am going to remove some of these because I'm ridiculous. But I'm going to go ahead and click on these little dots over here and unpin from the space as well as this one. So now we don't have any pinned objects. And then I am going to go ahead and go into these three little dots, hit the object type settings, go and scroll down all the way down to delete the object. I will be deleting it. I will be deleting all of these objects. So once again, you would click the three dots, object type settings, and I will go through all of the object type settings once we create an object. But just so that you're aware, you scroll all the way to the end and delete the object type. That's what you would do. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so just to go ahead and have an idea of what is going on when you first open your capacities. So you have your sidebar, which has your navigation. This is where your sections will live. Your object types will live here as well. And the calendar button lives here on the side as well. The calendar function in capacities is really, really powerful. You have the calendar here as well, and you have the ability to go into all of these. And directly from one of the dates, you can create a daily note. What's really interesting about capacities is that there are basic object types, which we will get to in a second. And the moment that you create one, it will automatically create that basic object type. So right now, we don't have any daily notes created, but if I go to today and I create a daily note, then you can see that I immediately get a daily note object created. And that is true of all of the basic object types. In this view, you have the option of seeing 3 days for your daily notes, the week, or the month. So you have all of these different views. You have the option of also collapsing these sidebars if you want the real estate. Okay, so that is that part. Now, of course, you can also go through the getting started section, but we're going to go ahead and kind of skip that. I'm going to just go through these and say we're done. So I'm going to finish and continue and we'll be done. And then you go into the Capacities Pro, discover Capacities Pro. And these are all different things, but we're not going to get to that just yet. Let's go ahead and go over here. So this is the section where you can go into your different spaces. Spaces and capacities are self-contained, so you cannot link between spaces. So whenever you're going to go ahead and create a new space, you want to keep this in mind, that if there's a probability of you wanting to link things to items in other spaces of yours, then it might be better for you to find a way to embed that into your current space instead of creating a new space for it. However, if there are things that you know you want to keep separate, then spaces are a really good tool for that. So you would go here, and when you first create your capacity space, it automatically will create a space for you. If you want to create a new one, then you would just go ahead and create space. And let's say I want to have my business stuff separate, right, from my main notes space. Then I can go ahead and put business here. And you have the ability to use emojis to use the icons. That is one of the pro features. So let's say here I want to use suitcase for my work, right? So I get to do that, and then I create the space. And now I can see pretty easily one or the other. And you can see that there's no object types because this is its own self-contained space. That is that. If you want to go ahead and once again, click in here and look at the space settings, that would open up to this section and to your general settings space. So you can get to this settings section from a lot of different places. If you want to go down here to the bottom of your navigation, then you can just go ahead and click settings and you are there. So the first one is your account information. That will show you your name. It'll show you your email. If you want to reboot the app or if you want to delete your account, that is under the accounts. So this is the editor section, and we're going to come back to this section once we have actually created some objects and have created some text and links so that we can look at the different ways that those things behave. Then we have our appearance, and one of the main differences between something like Obsidian and Capacities is that Capacities does not have a whole lot of customization options. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of people who, when they get confronted with Obsidian, they get overwhelmed by all of the things that they could do, all of the customization. And so Capacities is trying to do an opposite approach where you don't really have to think about that so much. It's ready for you to start working in it. And so you can avoid some of that overwhelm, that decision fatigue that can come from being able to customize so many things. So you have light and light dimmed. I usually have mine in light dimmed, dark and dark dimmed, but I usually like light dimmed. That's the one that I enjoy. For language, you can choose your language and your decimal separator. Date and time, you can choose your local time zone, and you can choose your date formatting. So for example, I like having 24 hours as my time format. I think I have mine as day, month, year, possibly, but you can choose whatever you want. And then of course you can choose whether your week starts on Monday or Sunday. This is the password and authentication section, your subscription and billing section. So this is the offline and sync section. You do have the ability of going offline with Capacities now, and you can see here what is locally stored. This is particularly important when you have the local app. And when it comes to media loading, you can decide for it to be everything or required only. And I do have mine to be everything. And then there is cloud media storage. With basic or unpaid, you have up to 5 gigabytes of storage, cloud storage. With pro, you have unlimited file storage. So that's also something to keep in mind. And then with exports, you can set up for there to be automated exports using the app itself. And I do have that set up. And then you can also have manual exports. And what's really cool about that is that you can have that as WikiLinks. You can choose to have all of your spaces exported or just some of them. You can include or not include media, export that, and then you have a local copy. And these do save as MD files. So one of the things that I hear often about some resistance when it comes to Capacities is whether they are MD files or not. And they are. So if you export them, then you have the ability to do MD files. Something that I did want to say is that at this time, there's no way for you to do batch importing of MD files or any type of files into Capacities. That is something that is on the roadmap and they are working on. It is already, I think it's already ongoing, like they're working on it. Either that or it's planned, but it is not currently available. You can export, but at the moment, there's no way to batch import. You can import one by one, but not batch importing. So that is something to keep in mind at this point in time. It wasn't much of a deal breaker for me because I had decided that when I was switching from Obsidian to Capacities that I would do a manual import so that I could decide what I wanted to import and what not and kind of take it a little bit slower. But I do know that if you have a huge amount of notes, that might be a put off. So that is something to just keep an eye out. It is going to happen. It just hasn't happened yet. And then you get into your space settings, which of course speaks to the current space. So this will change depending on what space that you're on. And so we'll come back to this particular section once we start creating objects. Then you have features, and a lot of these are pro features. So the AI assistant is only available through pro. Even if you do get pro, you have the ability to turn this off. So that is something to keep in mind. If you are not someone who enjoys having AI features, but you do want to get a pro account, you can hide the AI features altogether and not have to use them at all. Tasks is something that was recently released as well, I believe late last year. This is also a Capacities Pro feature that usually lives right under the calendar on the sidebar. Then you have calendar integrations. I believe current calendar integrations are to Google and Microsoft Calendar. I'm not sure if they're working on getting more integrations in. I just know that those are the two that are currently active. And then API, there's a couple of things that you can connect through API. Again, this is also a pro feature. I have Raycast on mine, and at one point, I was experimenting with Web Highlighter, and I had the API for that as well. But that is an option if you have things that you want to connect through an API. Then we get into integrations. There is a web extension that you can utilize, as well as the web highlights that I was mentioning earlier. Although web highlights is a pro feature, I believe the extension is not, so that's something to keep in mind. There is also an email integration that you can use, so kind of similar to like with the Kindle email feature. I'm not sure if I'm not really 100% certain what else has it, but I do know that Kindle, and I believe Readwise has it too, right? Where they create their own kind of like capture emails. So you can email something to um, save capacities and have that come in as an object type in your system. Telegram is a integration that you have access to, and WhatsApp is an integration that you have access to, even on the free version. And WhatsApp is something that I use every single day. I barely go into mobile capacities. Usually, when I need to capture something, I will use WhatsApp because you get a chat that is assigned between you and WhatsApp, and you can chat to it, and then it brings in whatever it is that you set in that chat with a timestamp, and that can be images, text, voice memos. I love the voice memos option. That to me is lifesaver. Links and the like. So sometimes I'll even like share a social media post to my Capacities chat, and then that'll get saved as a web link onto the system. So if you use WhatsApp or Telegram, I definitely recommend that integration. And it's great because you have the ability of using this even with a free account. So that's really, really cool. Then there's the Readwise integration, which is a Capacities Pro feature. The Readwise integration is something that I didn't think I was going to need. I didn't really use Readwise before going into Capacities. And I decided that I would give it a try since there was this integration that came in around the time that I did start with Capacities. And it has changed my life. I use Readwise so much now. It's one of those things that is like a major part of my tech stack at this point. There is also a Kindle integration, also part of the Capacities Pro line, as well as Raycast. I also use Raycast because I'm on my computer all the time because I work from home. I am kind of switching between WhatsApp and Raycast. If there's something that I want to write down, but I don't want to like exit and go into Capacities, even though I do have Capacities open pretty much the entire day, I will use the Raycast option because it also includes the timestamp, which I really, really like. So there's that. And then there are some, not very many, but some community integrations. And that is your kind of like settings section. Here you have the option of reloading the app. Again, sometimes there's like a little glitching that happens. Reloading the app might be your first way of trying to resolve that issue. And then you have the version that you're on down here. That might not be important for some people, but I just like to mention it because that some people might like to see that, especially because if you're going to be paying attention to the what's new section and kind of like the roadmap, you can see what version that you're on. Oh, here down before we keep going, you have first steps. So you could always go back to the first steps if you like. Right now, it's not available anymore. You could always go into first steps. Down here again, you can ask a question, and that takes you to the help desk. Documentation takes you to the documentation for capacities, and feedback takes you to the feedback panel, to the feedback page. And here you can leave bugs, feature requests, and improvements tickets. Cool. Trash got a new update recently, and you're able to either permanently delete or restore from here. So that's pretty cool. You can see the objects that I deleted yesterday. If I wanted to say, oh, I want to bring back quotes, I can just very easily go ahead and do that, and it is back there. Let's see. I want to bring back atomic notes, and I want to bring back media. Okay, so I brought those back, and now we have objects that exist in here. But let's go ahead and go back into settings and look at object types so that we can take a better look at this part. So with object types, you'll see that there's two sections. There's the custom object types and the basic object types. The main difference between both that is important to note is that basic object types, you cannot add properties to them. That is the biggest difference between custom object types and basic object types. So regardless of which one it is that you want to create, you would go over here to create so that you have your options to do that. So you can start with a template, and these are, as mentioned, templates that the team have created for some objects that they use that already have pre-built kind of like properties embedded. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see that there's an array of basic types. You have page, tag, image, web link, PDF, audio, file, tweet, AI chat, table, and query. And like I mentioned earlier, and how we saw with the daily notes, if at any point you were to create one of these things, let's say you use the WhatsApp integration and send yourself a picture, then it'll automatically create an image object if that's not already created. If you attach a PDF copy to a note, that'll create a PDF object. If you send yourself a link through a chat or anything like that, that would create a web link, so on and so forth. So any of these, if the object does not exist and you introduce said object into your system, it'll get automatically created. I'm going to go ahead and create a page. And as you can see for pages, you have title, aliases, tags, cover image, icon, description, content, last updated and created at properties. These are the only properties that pages will have because since it is a basic object type, you cannot add any properties. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. Pages are pretty much your most basic type of note. And I'll create an object for that in a second, but I want to create a couple more object types with you. I was going to say, I'm pretty sure queries are a pro feature. So I believe that queries are the only basic object type that you cannot create on a free plan. Oh, and then the AI chats. So let's say you are a Capacities Pro user and you do enjoy AI. Any chat that you have with AI within your system will create its own AI chat. So it keeps things separate from your original thoughts. Yeah, so AI chats and queries are the only basic types that you can only create on a pro plan. The others are available to you if you were to need them. So if we go back here, you saw that I have reestablished quotes, atomic notes, and media. And those are all custom object types with templates. So for example, if you click on media, you'll see that this is a template to capture notes on films, lectures, or podcasts, or any other sort of media really. And it comes in pre-created with title, cover image, rating, type, summary, notes, icon, date completed, and tags. If we go into the atomic note, then you'll see create atomic notes inspired by the Zettelkasten system. And this was created by Stefan, who's one of the creators of Capacity. Title, description, tags, notes, and cover image. So these are some things that if you don't want to go through the hassle of creating an object from scratch, then you have the option to select one of these. Like I showed earlier, quotes, title, tags, content, and icon. One of the big things with Capacities is that there are no folders. If we go back to the homepage, you'll see this section. What if your notes worked like your mind? Your brain doesn't think in folders, it thinks in things, people's, books, ideas, projects, and it connects them naturally. We call these objects. In Capacities, everything you care about becomes an object. No more deciding which folder something belongs in. No more losing ideas in nested hierarchies. Just think, capture, and let connections emerge, right? So instead of the file structure, you have objects. And so that is one big difference between something like Obsidian or Notion and Capacities, is that there are no folders. Now, you can make an argument that objects themselves are a type of folder, but it's a little bit different because you think, like, it's what it mentions in the homepage. You think in objects, right? Like whenever you think about a book, it's a book. If you think about a quote, it's a quote, right? It's not necessarily a quote nested in a folder. It is that thing, right? And so that is one big difference, and something that can be a bit of a, it can have a little bit of a learning curve if you're someone who is very particular with folder structure, but it can be very liberating if you're someone who has a lot of tension with folders. So I'm going to create a people object from scratch. You'll see that there is a person object here. And there are really cool use cases that you can see other people have used people for. And you'll see that these properties exist, but I don't really use these properties. And so for me, it's going to be more of a hassle to delete the properties than it is for me to just start a new object from scratch. So instead of creating an object from here, I'm going to create the people object from here. But before we do that, I did want to just go ahead and show you what it would look like to create it from this section. So we're going to go ahead and do a definition and go ahead and use template. And now we have a definition. Okay. And usually once you create a new object, you'll get hit with a note with ways that you can use that. So it's really cool as well. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I don't need that. And you guys are following my tutorial. So each object has the all view and the overview. And you'll see that if you go into each one, that is the case. Okay. If you want to go and edit the actual object itself, and I'm going to go ahead and showcase that with quotes, then you would hover over them and do these three little lines, and you'll see that you have a menu that comes up. You can open as a page or open a new tab. You can pin it to the sidebar. So let's say you're someone who, ends up with a bunch of different object types, but you want to make sure that your quotes are always top of mind because you love collecting quotes, as I do. Then you can go ahead and pin that to the sidebar. And now if you want to collapse all of your object types, you still have your pinned items here. What's really cool about pinned is that you can also pin actual notes, not just objects themselves, but we'll get to that in a second. So then you have also that you can create from a template, you can create a new collection, or you can go into your object type settings. We're going to go in there now. So in this page, you have the option of changing the emojis if you want to, using the icons if you're on the Pro feature. You'll see that there's a name and then a plural of the name, and then you can add a description of the object type. And here are where your properties are. So title would be the name of the quote. Tags would be any tags that you add to them. Content would be where the main content lives in your note. And icon if you want to add that. If you wanted to add any other properties, then you would go over here to add a property and select them. We'll go over every single property type now. So you have the option to do a text property, and I used text properties a lot because I like the flexibility of them. For quotes, you'll see here that it's only title, tags, content, and icon, but I like having an attribution option. Now you have two ways to go about this. You can do an object select, like let's say that you have your people object, right? And you know that you want to link it to the people, then to a person on there, then you can use this object select for that. The reason why I tend to go for the text property instead is because I can still link to the person. But if I don't want to create that person because I don't feel the need to, then I don't have to. And I'll show you that in practice. So I'm going to go ahead and do attribution. And you can choose an icon or an emoji. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Sure. And then instead of that, I'm going to go ahead and go into object types again. You can click on that. Instead of going into this section to create a new object, you can just hit object types and create from here. And I'm going to create my own object, and I'm going to say person. And the plural is people. And you can select a color. So you have all of these colors to choose from if you would like to. I'm going to make it yellow because that's just what I'm used to. And again, I'm going to do people. You know what? Instead, I'm going to use this one. create object type. And now I have a people object type. A. So I'm gonna just delete this. Cool. And then we're gonna go back to quotes. We're gonna go back to your settings. And I'm going to do, instead of the text property, I'm gonna go over to object select, select person, and then I'm gonna do, again, attribution and create. And so I can show you now the 2 examples for that when we get to it. And then let's see, blocks I would caution with blocks, because blocks are sections of text within a note. So I'm going to say, just so that you guys can see what the difference is. You see that there's a block here and a block here. About quote, my notes. My recommendation, you have to be careful with blocks, because once you delete a block, everything that is within, any text that's within that block will be lost. So you just have to be careful with blocks. My recommendation is that at least to start with, every object only has 1 block. And again, I will show you what this looks like once we get into the note. Let's see what else we can do. We can do labels. So labels would be like multi-selects. Let's see. I have in mine, I have a quote type label. Quote type, create. Every single one of these properties also have additional customization options when you go within them. So let's say, for example, this text attribution property, you can have it show so that it's always showing, it's hidden when empty, or it's hidden altogether. If you have the AI capabilities and you enjoy them, you can also set up automation here. And you also have a limited ability to change property types. I believe that this is very limited, so I really never go here. And then you have the option to delete the property. That's the text one. Object select has a couple of more options. So with object select, you have the ability to do 2-way linking, which is really, really cool, because it sort of automates when you link something so that those 2 things link to each other. So for example, I can go ahead and say, because this is linking to the people or the person object, I can say I want this to link back to the quote property, or I want this to link back to quotes, and you'll see what that looks like. You can choose it to be a multiple or single select object type. However, if you're going to do to a property, you do need it to be a multiple select. And then you can do fixed or non-fixed set. And then once again, visibility can be always show, hidden with empty, or hidden, AI autofill, or you can change the type. So you can change object selects to labels instead, or to text. But in this case, I'm not going to do that. And then we want to go ahead and apply those changes. Blocks don't have any customization options. And then quote types, in this case, is a label property. Labels have, again, various options. So you can have it be a single or multi-select. So if it is a label that you want only one option, let's say you want it to be fiction or nonfiction in a book, then that would be either one or the other. Then you'd have a single select. If you wanted it to be multiple selects, let's say for genre, there could be multiple genres for one book, then you would want it to be multiple. So that's what that is. And then you can choose your label set. So in this case, for quotes, I have the quote type to either be a media quote or a person quote. So if it was directly said by a person, then it would be a person quote. If it's something that I got from a piece of media, a movie or a TV show or a book, then that would be a media or source quote. And so I have that. And again, visibility, always show, hide when empty or hidden. Cool. And apply changes. A couple of other options for properties are checkboxes, the date and time. What's really cool about date and time is that any object with a date and time property will show up on your daily note as a way for you to create said object. And I'll show you that in a second. Number, description, cover image, and then you can choose to add the created or last updated properties. And you can also have aliases. For quotes, I don't really need aliases, so I'm not going to add any of these, but that is how you would go about adding properties for your items. Of course, you can move those around for however it is that you wish your order to be, and you can delete as well. You have the option to select how your default link will look for this type of object. Every single object has different options. Let's say you want to create a template, then you would do that here. And then you have a couple of customization options for images. You can either have the preview image be displayed fully or cropped to the available space. You can use normal or wide layout on the note, and I will show you that in a second once we get to create a note. You also have the ability to have choose small cover image or wide cover image, and then you get to page layout. So you have the standard, you have the index card, which is kind of used to mimic Zettel's or index cards, of course, the profile option, and the encyclopedia option. I really like encyclopedia and standard, and you can just experiment with which one you prefer. And then here you can customize your card view for the object. So let's go ahead and create some. So I'm going to go ahead and create a quote. We can do that from, let's do that again. And we can do that by, in this case, hitting the create object here, or we can hit create object up here as well. You can also go to the sidebar, hit the 3 dots, and create a quote from there. Additionally, you can create an object from here. So like, let's say we go quote and create that. And finally, you can also create a brand new quote by hitting Command P, typing quote, and then hitting create quote there. So there's a few options for you whenever you want to create any single object. If you're interested in looking at what other shortcuts there are, you can always access that through either this shortcut or clicking it here and then seeing that. So let's go ahead and create a new object. So here's what I mean about blocks. So you can see that blocks are kind of like automated toggles. However, if, like, let's say there's something important here and one day you're like, you know what, I don't really want this about quote. I don't need it. It's kind of like useless to have that there. I'm going to go into my object settings, which you can do again from this section here, the 3 dots, object type settings. I'm going to delete this. Deleting this property will remove it from the whole object type, meaning it will remove from all of them. So if you accidentally deleted it, or you deleted it and then realized, oh wait, there was maybe some notes that had stuff in that block, it's gone forever. And you'll notice that when there's only one block, then you don't have that toggled option. Now you can just create toggles naturally by doing this little open bracket and then you have a toggle, or you can just do the backslash and that opens up the this here, and you can select toggle, right? So the toggle option still exists, it's just not in block form. My point is that blocks can be very dangerous, so just keep that in mind. And so here you see that we have 2 attributions because I want to show you the different options between how to select an attribution. So we will get to that in a second. Let me just go ahead and create my quote. I've gone ahead and added my attribution here, and I get to decide, do I want Tanila Santoka to be a person in my database? Is this a person that I will maybe link to other things? And I think so, because I am a lover of haiku and he wrote haiku. So you can go ahead and create an object in this way as well. So if you go ahead and highlight whatever it is that you just wrote, you'll see that you get this menu. And you have 2 options. Either you can create automatically an object from that text selection by hitting the plus sign, or if you're not 100% sure if you've already created this person, which becomes more and more of a problem the more notes that you create. Obviously, I know that I haven't created it in this space, but you can also click on the @ and that will search anything in your system to determine if it's in there. And you can select that to link it, or you can create a new one. As you can see, it automatically says to create a page. Like I mentioned earlier, pages are your most basic forms of notes, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create, let's say, I'm not sure. I don't know. Do I want to create people objects? I'm not 100% sure. So I'm just going to create a page for them, right? There are a few things that are happening here that I want to make note of. If we go back into our settings and go into the editor, we can look at this now and have a little bit of a better idea what these things mean. You can disable spell check. I don't like to disable spell check, so I'm not going to do that. You can select a spell check language. Next would be default page sidebar position. So floating or static. What that means, if I were to go in here, you see if I hover over this, it shows me the objects on this page and the statistics for it, including words, sentences, paragraphs, characters, when I created it and when I last updated it. This is the floating option. You can go ahead and switch this if you don't want to go back into the settings into the static sidebar, and that way it's always there. You can hide it or you can reopen it and so on. So you have the option of it being floating or static. I always have mine as floating. So there's that. That's one of the options there in the settings that now I can explain to you because we have an object and a node. Okay, so going back over here, we go back to editor, is always open as full page. So as you've been seeing, whenever I open the object quote, it opens in this preview modal. You can have this so that it always opens in full page if you want to. Additionally, you can, let's say you want to sometimes have the preview open and sometimes you want the full page. You can have this enabled and then just use the shortcuts to open it in a preview modal. So to show you that, now if I click into here, it automatically opens in this full page. If I go back and I use the shift option, I can open it as the preview modal. So those are different ways that you can open the object itself. And then if you were to keep it as open as preview, then you can always turn it into a full page by clicking this instead. Next up is this section here, always create inline links. If I were to go ahead and let's say I type this up, this is attributed to Daniela Santoka. So you can see here that it created this link inline. I can keep typing, right? However, with that selection not made on the settings, if I were to do Daniela Santoka here, you can see that it's showing me, it's showing up as a block instead of an inline link. And there's a couple of ways that you can go about this, right? In this case, I can go ahead and select these three dots. And because it is a block, I can have the option to go over here to object block options and change the way that it looks. So I have the option to do small card, wide card, and if there's an image here that would show up, or embed. So I could even open this up directly in here without having to reopen the note. Now, I prefer, this is something to keep in mind. When I'm going to remove this from here and I hit backspace to remove it, I want to hit remove just here, which means that I'm just removing it from this page. If I'm deleting something that I actually want to delete the object of altogether, then you would select this and that would delete the object, not just from this view, but altogether. I don't want to do that. I just want to remove it from this page. So I'm going to make sure that is not selected. I prefer having this setting so that it always creates inline links. That's my preference because I can always go over here and hover over this, hit edit, and turn this into a block if I wanted to. And then I have the same option to do that. Now, let's say I want to change it back to inline. I can very easily do that by shifting that. You'll notice that this block has a little icon here on the side. That's also a setting. That is the next one we're going to look at. Show object type for inline object links. So if I remove that, then it removes the icon. I quite like having the icon, but that might be distracting to you. So feel free to remove that if you don't want to, but I quite like it. This section here, disable the automatic transformation of the shortcut for numbered lists. I don't want that disabled, but you might want to. So you can go ahead and select that if you would like. I have mine set up with only block with backlink, but you have the option of playing around with having the full path instead. This section, hide object type settings outside of settings. So if I were to select this, I would not be able to add properties from the main page. So I can no longer add properties from here. Whereas if it's not selected, you'll see that if I hover, I have the ability to add property from here. I prefer having that selected, that available to me, but you might not. So that might clean up your UI a little bit more if that bothers you. So that's an option. Then if you have a toggle, there are some lines that you can have. You can choose to hide that or include that. You can pick whether it is a toggle or a bullet in your style. On App Start, you can choose whether it opens to the last open page that you just had in your PKM, to calendar or calendar today. I have it set up to always open at calendar today. You can choose to have the backlinks, which is a section that happens underneath your notes. I'll show you that by going into Danela Santoka, this section here of backlinks. You can have this hidden by going here. And then that is automatically hidden always. And then you can just open it up if you would like to see that. What's really cool about the backlinks is you have the option to customize it. So if you hit that little customize button, you have the option of filtering from here. You have the option of sorting, of grouping, and you also have the option of changing the view. So right now it's an embed. So if I wanted to, I can see everything from here, but you might want it to be wall, or you might want it to be a list, or you might want it to be gallery, Kanban, or embed. So you have the ability to modify the view for that, which is really, really cool. I quite like that. So I'm going to unselect that because I like having it open whenever I go into a note. You have the ability to, with pro features, to change the highlight style from highlights that come in from Readwise, Kindle, or the web. You have unlinked mentions, which to me is one of the best parts. I love unlinked mentions because, let's say, for example, I decided at the time that I didn't want to create Danela Santoka, but I did leave his name. If eventually I were to ever create a person for him, he would show up. This note would show up as an unlinked mention, and then I can go in and link it. So it's really, really cool because unlinked mentions will show up wherever that an instance of that word exists, even if it's not linked, which I quite like for like the serendipity of it all. Okay, so let's say I decided actually I want to create people. And so I created the object and I have a bunch of people notes now that are under page. It is very simple for you to go in and change it to its respective object. So I'm going to change this to a person, and then you get this selection where you can map the different properties. In this case, because pages is a basic object type, there's not really any properties to map to, but you can just check to make sure and select accordingly. In this case, we're going to change type. Cool. And so now you can see that we have this random quotes property. I haven't added any properties to the people object, but because I created a two-way link object, it automatically added this to here. And I can see, oh, look, this quote belongs to Danila Santoka. And so if I go over here, you'll see that you have this object select. And so it automatically does this link, and it looks really, really nice. However, I find that for things like this, I prefer having the text property. Even though I quite like how it looks, I like the flexibility of being able to A, not create the person right from the start, and B, also have, let's say if it's from a book, I can add the book as well. If I have a year that I want to include, I can do that. And so I quite like that. So then if I go over here, I can modify my properties right from this page as well. And I can have this, you can change the visibility, you can edit the property, and then you open the page, or you can go ahead and delete it. In this case, I'm going to delete this object type. And then as you can see, this still exists. I don't keep my quotes this way. I have a query that I use for things like that. But if you're not wanting to pay for queries, right, like upgrading to a pro account just for queries, this is a really good way to do that. Okay, so I've created a couple more quotes so that I can show you a couple other things. So I hate how this looks. So yeah, that's just my whole thing. So you can go ahead and change, like, let's say I don't like how this card preview looks. You can go into your three little dots and hit object type settings once again, and go back down to the section that we talked about earlier to customize the card view. And in this case, what I don't like is the content preview. I don't quite enjoy that, so I can remove that. And that's about it. If I wanted to add attribution, I can do that as well. I could also add the quote type if I wanted to. I don't really care for that. I don't have to. If I want to see that, I can just go into the object itself. So I quite like that, but I don't like the difference in size. This is the gallery view. If you want to change the way that you see this, in the same way that we modified the backlinks section, you can go into here. So this little section will show you how many entries, or how many quotes in this case, are in this section. You can filter. So let's say I want to filter to just see quote types that include person quote. So these are 2 people quote. So I can go ahead and do that. Let's say, actually, no, I just want to see the media source quotes. So that's really cool. You can also sort it. So you can sort it by title, or by when it was created or last updated, by attribution type, by quote type. You can do that. You can also group. So let's say I want to group instead of filtering, right? I want to group by quote type, then I can do that. Or you can do it by when it was created. And you can choose that I want to see all of the quotes that I created by month, right? Or by year. You can do that from here. In this case, I mentioned earlier, I don't quite like all the spacing here. So I can choose to change this to wall, and that kind of like expands the card based off of the content. You can also see it by list, Kanban, gallery, which was what we saw earlier, table, which is one of my favorite way to view things, and embed. So again, I can go ahead and go into here and say, and see all of it without having to even open the quote. So those are a few customization options. What's really cool, I think, about something like this is that you have to do a lot of building when something like Obsidian to create bases, and Capacities has it pretty much built in, which is really, really cool. I'm someone who I've realized that I don't necessarily like having all of my notes in a linear way. I much like it, I much in like a vertical way. I prefer it in a horizontal form. So that's something to kind of think about too, what your preference is. Of course, you do have the option of seeing it as a list though, right? So it's pretty cool. I quite like it. Now I want to talk about collections. So you have the type, and there's a lot of back and forth on whether you should use a label or a collection for some things. I will say I use collections for things that you can see in the navigation, and labels for just additional classification. So for quotes specifically, I've mentioned this in some of my other videos. I collect quotes based off 3 criteria. I like the style of it. I think that the quote is thought-provoking, and there's a section where, more than thought-provoking, it's really striking, or it's intense, and I find that it's a Hall of Fame type thing, right? And so I have collections for those. So you can create collections 2 ways. You can either go into a quote or an object or a note and create a collection directly in there, right? So like, let's say, the one who's in love always wins. It doesn't matter if you get your heart broken, you're living. When you're feeling, you're alive. The sun doesn't care whether the grass appreciates its rays, it just keeps on shining. To me, when I save this, to me, this is striking. And so I'm going to add this to my striking collection. Striking intense. Cool. And you can see automatically, you saw that, how it added it here, right? I don't have automatically here whether to see if it's a person quote or a quote, a media quote, but I do have the option of seeing these by collection. And you can also pin this to sidebar. So this is another example of something that you can pin. Let's go into the other one. All lovers believe they are inventing love. I think this is stylish for me. And while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead. When I think about all lovers believe they are inventing love, you know what? I know that I really love the topic of love. So I'm going to tag this with on love. And as soon as I hit enter, you'll see that tags are created now. We hadn't created a tag yet. On love. Yes, I want to do that. And Ethan Hawke's quote is also on love. So I'm going to tag that with that as well. Perfect. Then I'm going to go into the Nena Santoka's quote. People view all things, all events in terms of what they value in life, with that as their standard. That to me is thought-provoking. Cool. So if I go into my quotes, I have these here. If I have this little section, I can add striking intense, stylish, and thought-provoking. And I can move that to be in the order that I want it to. If I go into here, I have the option of opening this as a page. And if I do that, then I have the option of adding emojis or icons. So for style, I have the nail. And then for thought provoking, again, if I open it as a page, I have the thinking. And then for striking and intense, I have the little heart there. Cool. And so I have my 3 little options. And if I go over here, then I have them available for me to click into. Like, let's say I'm in people, right? And I'm like, ooh, I want to see my thought provoking quotes. I can go in here. I don't have to go into quotes, hit thought provoking, so it's a little bit easier to get to. You save on some clicks. What's really cool about each of your dashboards is that you have the option to, like, let's say you don't really want to do collections, that's fine, but you have the option of selecting not in any collection, not tagged, no backlinks. And these are ways for you to process your notes. Let's say you want to make sure, in the case of quotes, you want to make sure that every single quote gets put into a collection. If you go into here and see that there's something embedded, then you know that you have to process that quote. So that's really, really useful. I quite like that. Now let's get to the point where we haven't talked about it yet, but the power of links. All lovers believe they are inventing love. So you'll notice that there's this little graph view. Something like Obsidian has the ability to do graph view for your entire vault. Capacities only does local graphs. So if you're ever in a note, you can see if there's anything connected to that note by hitting on the graph. And you can see that this quote is connected to this quote through the on love tag. And I can click on love and see that. Obviously, there's not a lot of information on this in this vault that I'm teaching you. So you have a different way of seeing your notes kind of interacting with each other through the means of the graph view. And it's always very localized because of the fact that it's a local graph, and so it's a little bit easier to digest than perhaps the full vault full space graph would be. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and let's go into people again and go into Danila Santoka. So I'm going to add some properties. I'm going to add cover image, aliases, because I also want this to show up in case I add aliases. In case I ever type it as Santoka without this spelling, I want it to also show up. And Taneda Santoka actually was a pen name. His real name was Choichi Taneda, and so I'm going to go ahead and add those as aliases as well. Cool. And that way, if ever there's a unlinked mention or anything like that, or a backlink or something with any of these spellings, those things also show up. I'm going to go ahead and add a cover image, and I'm going to go ahead and hit upload and drag it over here. And again, I haven't created images yet, so you'll see that as soon as I do this, images was created. And so here we have a couple of options in terms of settings that we haven't really talked about. So whenever you add an image, you have the option of, if you go ahead and hover over this, you can open the image as its own object, which we'll get to in a second, but you have this toggle wide cover image. So the quality on this is not very good. So I wouldn't really do that, but you can, if you like the image to be full screen like that, you can go ahead and then reposition it. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and toggle this again so that it's small. Additionally, you have the option of doing wide layout or normal layout on your notes. So you can toggle that on and off as well. I usually will keep it as the normal layout. And then I wanted to show you what this would look like if you were to change the style of the page. So going back into our person object settings, if we go all the way down to page layout and I change this to index card, you'll see that this is what it looks like now. And I have the option of minimizing this, and it becomes a little index card type situation. where the properties are on the sidebar. All of the other ones, that's what it looks like. The properties are on the sidebar. Profile is often used for people. And again, the properties are on the side, so you can move them out of the way. My favorite of these three is definitely the encyclopedia. That gives you kind of like a square, but again, the properties are all on the side. The reason I really like this one is if I were to open this in preview mode and toggle this, I like this view quite a lot. I like the look of this and then the properties on the side. So I use encyclopedia quite often in my system and standard. I quite like having the properties on top of the page as well. Oh, the sun is coming in so nicely. I feel like I've been talking for 5 years. I hope that you guys are enjoying this video. Please let me know in the comments if you're enjoying it. I wanted to make this like one large video so that you guys can kind of like move around wherever you would want to instead of me having to make it in parts and then you guys are waiting. So I hope that you guys enjoy this very, very lengthy video. And if there's anything that I miss or anything that you guys want me to talk more about, please let me know in the description as well. Okay, so there is that. One of my favorite things about capacities is the timestamping. So if I were to go ahead and hit now, 1738, it's 1738 as I'm typing this. Currently, because it's the same day, this is showing up as just 1738, but in future days, it'll show up as the full date like this. So what's really cool is that, okay, cool, the timestamp is on here. And actually, if I click onto this, it'll take me to the daily note. But then I also have the ability to see my date references here. Remember how I mentioned that if any object has a date property, you're able to create it directly from the daily note page? This here is what I mean. So it looks like the media object has a date property. And so if I wanted to, I could create it directly from here. Any object that ends up with a date property will show up as a little button that you can do here. And I have a bunch of them because I love having the date properties. And anything with a date property will show up on your sidebar. So like, for example, if I were to go over here and select a date and time and add a date and time property, it would show up in the calendar. He was born in December 3rd, 1882, right? I can go into December 3rd, 1882 and see that he was born on this day. 1882. I love it so much. I find this to be so, so fun. It's one of my favorite things ever. Now, I will say I have stopped adding birth date this way because not every single person I'm going to have the exact date of birth for. And I like there to be some consistency in the way that I keep track of certain information. So going back to what I originally said about the fact that I prefer having text properties, I have a birth property that I will go ahead and do December 3rd, 1882. And he was born in the Yamaguchi prefecture in Japan. And in my system, I have a year object, so I would link it to 1882. And I have a Japan note, so I would link it to Japan. And that way I have all of the information in here. Actually, most of the time what I'll do is I'll do 1882 and then I'll do December 3rd because I have a query where I have people by birth year. And so I like having that first, December 3rd. So let's go ahead and create a new object type. So there's years, and then I'm also going to create one for places. Right? Okay. So now if I go back into people, I'm going to create a new place for Japan, and I'm going to create a new year for 1882, right? And so now if I go into Japan, you'll see that Taneda Santoka is in there. And if we go back into our graph, you'll see that this is growing. Japan is linked to Taneda Santoka, who is linked to December 3rd, 1882, because I have still the birth date assigned to it. And you can see how it kind of shifts, right? As soon as I move back and forth between notes, it kind of shifts here. Then this is linked to people view all things through the lens of, let's see, people view all things, all events in terms of what they value in life. That's linked to thought provoking. And you can kind of see how this would continue to grow. If I were to find something else that happened in 1882 and link it to that, then that would get linked to this. Or if I added something else and linked it to Japan, that would go over here. And so slowly but surely, you start through proximity, creating these little pockets of potential serendipity and aha moments. And through linking things, then you could find that you can end up making connections that you never would have expected before. And so since I added a date property to the people note, people object type, now I can create a person from this page as well. So then let's say I have a daily note, right? And I am typing it here. Let's say and then I'm going to create first song and do that. And so now we have some tags in here that are going on. So if I go into this tag, I can change the color here. Hey, yeah. And then I can also change the icon. I don't think I have an icon for media log though, so I'm not going to do that. And then here for first song, I have mine as gray. So I'm going to make that gray. Oh, I added this to December 3rd, 1882. Let's not do that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to delete this object because I don't want that there. And I'm going to hit today and I'm going to add this here instead. There we go. And then another thing that is really, really cool about your daily notes is that even if you didn't have a daily note, which I use mine as an inbox, right? You can go here and check your daily note this way, or you can see it from here. Even if I were to say like delete this, I'll delete that, right? You still have your date references. So any single time you have a timestamp or a date on an object, that will show up here. And you have the things that you created on this day. And so you can see that I have this year one, which I can delete because I'm not going to use that. And this place one, because again, I can delete that as well. And the tags that I created. And you can also change the way that these look. I usually have mine, I think, in table view. And so in this way, you can see all of the things that you created on this day, living alongside all of the things that you timestamped on this day, which is a really, really cool thing. And and just the power of the calendar to me is really, really impressive. It's one of my favorite parts about Capacities. If you go into tags, you can also create collections. You can create collections for every single object type. And then you can go in here and select them. Obviously, these are they no longer have anything, but we do have on love. As you can see, we have these two, which are the other two that we connected. So we talked about earlier how there are no folders in Capacities, but they recently launched this thing called sections, which kind of gives you a little bit of a fix if you're needing some structure. Like I use it a lot for kind of like context switching for me. But what's really cool about sections is that the same object can live in multiple sections. So let's say, for example, I want to have a utilities section or an extras section or a basic object section. Let's say utilities instead. I can go ahead and create that section, and then now it's here. And I can move this down or above or wherever I want to. And let's say I want to add pages. So I would go ahead and hit these three dots, pin to sidebar, and instead of doing it at pinned like we've done before, I'd move it to utilities. And let's say I want to do daily notes as well, and I want to do tags, and I want to do images. Okay. Now, if I'm only wanting to look at my utilities, I can go ahead and close object types and do that, right? Let's say I want to make a source notes section. right? And you can also change your icons here as well, right? And again, you can move this up and down. I want to have my people be in source notes. I want to have my media be in source notes, my quotes in source notes, right? And so right there, you can see I have quotes under source notes and I have quotes under pinned. So I have them in two different places. But let's say I find that I actually really want to be able to go into my tags really often while I'm still in this kind of like view. I can add that as well. I can pin that to be under source notes and utilities, right? So what's really powerful about sections versus folders is that I can choose for my objects to be in multiple sections instead of having to choose it to be in the best folder that it can be in. So that is something that's really, really cool and I quite enjoy about sections. And then let's say, actually, I don't really care about this. I can delete that. So that is a very, very cool thing. I'm going to go ahead and delete this section because I don't really need it. And yeah. Editing Chris here, adding this little bit of video into it because I realized as I was editing that there were a couple of other things that I wanted to just briefly touch on that I didn't get to. One of those things being how images, web links, PDFs, they are in and of itself also notes that you can write information into, which is very different from something like Obsidian where images have to be attached into a note. You cannot directly onto the image add any metadata. So if you go into the images, like for example here with Taneda Santoka, of course you can rename the image. You can give it tags. Like for example, I like having, actually I'm going to edit this to not have the spaces. I like having color tags, so I have some of those, right? You can also make collections. Like I mentioned earlier, every single object type has the opportunity to have collections. So like, let's say you collect portrait images, right? And so like you like having them. So you can say you have a portrait image collection, right? I have, for example, on my end, I have words and reminders for anything that falls within that. I also have screen captures as a collection, but you can choose, of course, whatever it is that you want. And likewise, you can add notes in here. So I can link to Taneda Santoka so that it's really easy for me to go into that back and forth, like we've talked about before. You can, of course, use the backlinks to do that, but the option exists that you can tag it accordingly or link it accordingly. Another thing that I did want to mention that I didn't get to before is the different ways that you can add links into like inline links, right? So I've talked about before about the plus, where you can create an object using the plus, right? Like right, so let's say I type this, right? I can select the actual word and create a new object this way. I can search for objects this way. And for example, I don't have Japanese, but I know I have Japan, right? And I can go ahead and link that and it doesn't change out the actual way that you've written it. So that's really interesting. You can also hover over this, edit, and modify what's being said, right? So in that way, it's kind of like a link, like a regular web link where you give a different title, if you know what that is like, to the link on different platforms. It's kind of like that. So that's really nice. So I can see that that is in here now. But you can also add inline links in a similar way that you would in something like Obsidian with WikiLinks. So I can open up the WikiLinks and type it this way. So that is one way that you can link to different things. And as you can see, I'm typing all of this into the image itself. So images, you are able to add, you cannot add new properties, but you can use the ones that are already available to you, like the description and the tags. And then this also connects via the graph view. So media objects are really, really useful in Capacities because of this reason. Aside from having objects or collections pinned as objects in here, you can also pin specific notes, right? So I can pin this tag if I wanted to, and that would be here. I can go into, like, let's say there's one specific quote that I want to have all the time because I love it so much. As a reminder, I can pin this to the sidebar, and then that way it's always in there. And you can pin things into specific sections. So, like I mentioned earlier, if I have a pin section that has objects in it, so like let's say atomic notes, right? I wanted to pin this to thinking. I want to have definitions pinned to thinking, and I want to have tags pinned to thinking, right? I can also create an object. Let's say, for example, I have a note called figuring out my favorite problems, which in and of itself is a thinking type of note, right? I can go ahead and come over here, pin to sidebar, and add this to my thinking space. And so you can pin multiple things in the sections and in the pin section, which is really, really cool. It's a really interesting way to organize your navigation. And then the last thing I noticed that I didn't touch on was templates. So I'm going to quickly go in and modify this media, or go into this media object and see what we have, because this is one of the template ones. And we can see that we have type. And in type, we have all of these different options, right? And so let's say that you have a specific template that you want to use for when you make book notes, right? You can come over here into the object settings, go into new template, this define template sections, and create a new template. Let's say you want to make this book template, right? So I can go ahead and select book for here. And I can say, okay, I know that I want to have, does this have an icon? Yeah, I want all my books to have this book icon. I want them to have the book type. And then I would like to have a notes section and a review section, right? And what I did there, in case you're not aware, is you can, and another thing to mention is that you can always click into these little dots here, and you have a bunch of customization options. You can change the hierarchy of what you're writing. So let's say you don't want it to be a header, you can change that back, or you can make it a heading again. You can also do that by doing the backslash and then modifying it this way. Let's say you want to make this a toggle. You can do that. Or let's say instead of a toggle, or I want to also make it a bulleted list, I can do that there as well. So those are some customization options. And then you also have the option, once you click on here, to come to this section down here. And if you open that, you have some customization options. You can add emojis to the actual blocks themselves. So let's say I want to give that emoji, and then I want to come over here and give this this emoji. And then let's say I also want to give it a highlight color. So kind of similar to Notion, you can change the color of what's written, and you can change the highlight of it as well. That's kind of light, so let's change it to a darker color so you guys can see. So there's customization options there as well. And you can also move things around so that they're in columns. So you can do that as well and customize things that way, which is really, really nice. And that's where something like going into a wide layout will be really useful, because then you have more space. So let's say you know that your review section is going to be smaller than your notes. And actually, I think I want notes first. So I can come over here and make this a bigger section than my review section, right? And so you can modify your templates that way. And now if I go back to media and I create an object, this is what's going to happen. But let's say I know I want to use a book, I can just hit book template, and then this automatically populates so that I don't have to be doing that every single time. I know that this is something that I have available to me. There are certain templates that you may want to have available to you as a default template. And to do that, you would just go to, again, the object type settings, go down to the templates, and select this little star to mark it as default. And in that case, every single time you make a new object, it will automatically populate the template. I have something like that set up for my diary notes, for example. And so those are some of the things that I wanted to jump in and talk about because I realized I didn't spend much time on them in the original walkthrough. But yeah, let's go back into the original video to finish this out. Now, let's go ahead and show you my actual Vault so that we can look at a couple of the pro features and how I use them. Okay, so we are in my main space, which I'm currently calling the Digital Swamp, but I might change at some point. This is what my in-use capacity system looks like. So right from the start, right here on the daily page, like the calendar page, you can see all of the different things that I have that have date properties that I can create right from here, right? So I have like interactions, I have tasks, prompts, zettles, notes, diary, and you can have it set up so that certain objects are only created once within the time frame that you've selected. So as you can see, I have a diary object and a week object to its respective day. But if I were to go over here to the 25th, which I haven't created a diary object for, you'll see that that shows up back again here. And my weeks are set up so that they go from weekly update to weekly update. I do weekly update videos on my Patreon where I go through all of the things that I'm working on behind the scenes of business, where I talk about any new updates in my analog journals and then all of the notes that I created in my capacities that week. So I do that every single week. And one of the ways that I keep track of those things is by this weekly note. And so if I were to go here to the 26th, you'll see that there's no weekly note because the week technically for me starts on Thursdays, and then that's available to go here. So it's a really cool way to very quickly create objects right from the calendar page. And then you can see here the notes that I told you about that I have in my daily note that came from WhatsApp. You can see the WhatsApp icon and from Raycast. That's the little icon that comes from there. And so that's in there. Any date references will show up down here. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a course that I'm participating in and I have a date range for that. And so anything that takes place during that date range will have this course here. I just recently finished up another course, the Explain What You Mean course. And so you can see here the last day was the 21st. Once I get to the 22nd, then it's no longer a date reference. You also get to see your tasks in this view. I don't have any tasks right now associated to these specific dates, so there's nothing showing up there. And then you have your created on this day. And like I mentioned, I usually have this set up as a table view. I quite enjoy the table view, so that's what I do. So one of the ways that I use variable queries is in the weekly note. So if we were to go into one of my diary notes, you'll see that these are properties that I keep track of every single day. This is one of those object select properties, same with this one. And I use that to navigate between diary objects. So this will be previous day and this will be next day because it is a two-way property. So if I go over here, you'll see that I have it set up so that is a two-way property and I have it to link to another diary object. And so I kind of have it so that because it's set up that way, as soon as I select the following day, it'll automatically populate the previous day and so on and so forth. So I really only have to populate one of these for it to populate the following one. And then it creates this really easy way for me to navigate between objects. That is, again, that's a free feature. That's not a pro feature. However, I do have it set up so that in the weekly notes, I have a query that picks up. It's a variable query, so it uses the date ranges to be able to pick this up. And it picks up all of my diary entries. And because I have it in table view, I'm able to see certain properties that way. Same thing with my creativity log. So this picks up properties related to the statistics for the week, and this picks up the properties that I chose based off of my creativity log, right? So you can choose, first of all, what the query is picking up, and then you can also pick property visibility. I'm not going to go into queries right now, but if you're interested in like deep diving into queries, but if you're interested in how I set up this template with these queries, then let me know and I will make sure to make a video for that. And then I also have queries to pick up all of the notes that I created by day. And so you can kind of see a glimpse of that. And you can see if I go into edit that I have quite a lot of objects types that are getting picked up here. I think it would be really cool. Actually, I might create a ticket for it. I think it would be really cool if there could be an option to just like return all objects except, and that way you don't have to select every single one. But for now, that's not an option. So I have all of these selected, and then those get picked up here. And I'm able to, during my weekly update, go day by day, showcasing what it is that I collected and created on that day, and then kind of talking about that on a meta level. And so that's really a really cool way to kind of see this information. You can see this information in the daily notes, like we've talked about. However, as of right now, if you were to go into the week, you're only seeing the daily notes themselves. So a major difference between the daily note and how it's treated in something like Obsidian versus Capacities is that you have your calendar, and that is separate from your daily note. The daily note is an object within the calendar view, whereas the calendar in Obsidian is the daily note, right? And so that's a little bit different. If I were to delete this daily note, like I showed you in my previous video, in the previous section, like I showed you in one of the previous sections, I would still have access to everything else that's on here, right? And so right now, and this is a ticket that is open, but right now you can't see anything else. You can't really see this view in the 3 days, the week, or the month. And so that's a bit of a the query is a bit of a workaround for that for me. And then I have a separate section for the images that I created for that week. And then you can kind of see the backlinks here. So with Readwise, you can see that I have my active connection going on, and that is going into the digital swamp. I have a tag called Capacities that I make sure my Readwise articles are tagged with, and those will automatically sync into my Capacities. And you have object mappings, and you can map specific properties as well. And you can also choose to synchronize different tags. So that's the Readwise integration. With task management, like I mentioned earlier, I use it a little bit differently. So I've come in here and created a couple of more statuses, idea, research, and PKM maintenance, and those are the ones that I use. If we go into tasks, you'll see that I have these PKM maintenance tags, right? So like, for example, this Frankenstein meta object that I have a task here, spend some time building this MOC and creating different notes on Frankenstein. And I have subjects to research. I have quite a lot of subjects to research. So before, I used to have a research tag, and I would embed that anywhere that I wanted to do more research about. But now, depending on how much I want to research the thing, I will create a task for it. So, for example, I have a research more on Faust note. Another big thing that is a pro feature that I'm not going to spend time on because I don't really utilize is the AI assistant. They have been doing quite a few updates on the AI of it all, but I don't really follow those things. I don't have much to offer on that front. I'm sure there may be other videos that you guys can see, or even on the Capacities team website or the documentation to learn more about the features related to AI. And then just to finish off, I wanted to show you the power of linking once again. If I were to go back to Planeta Santoka as our example, I didn't plan for him to be the example that I would use, but he became that because he's a recent note that I created. So if you go into the graph view, okay, there's only 2, but let's show more. And you can see there is a lot of notes. I didn't mention it earlier, but if you were to go into this little selection tool, you have the ability to modify the view of your local graph to show or not show certain objects, to show or not show completed tasks, to hide objects with many links, and to hide dates, or to show the simplified graph. In this case, because there are so many notes, that happens, but this is an example of a non-simplified graph where you can see the icons associated with that thing. And then here is one, or it's like the associated, where it's a simplified, where you just have the little dots. So for example, right here, I'm going to go into River Phoenix, my beloved. And you can see that there are 2 associated works that I have in my system for him, Stand By Me and My Own Private Idaho. And you can see here that he is connected to a few things. He's connected to 1970 because that is the year he was born in. And he's connected to 1993 because that is the year he died in. He's also connected to Mike Waters, which is connected to My Own Private Idaho because that is his character in My Own Private Idaho. I saved his character in it. And you can see here that if I clicked on that, this is a much bigger tree graph. I'm going to move this one over here, but you can see that Mike is once again connected to the same things through River Phoenix, but then he's also connected to gay characters and LGBTQ, which is connected to Interview with a Vampire and How Far the Light Reaches. Um, LGBTQ is part of my topics collections in my tags, which is connected to queerness, which is connected to The Seep by Chana Porter. And so if I go into Interview with a Vampire, right, then that has its own connections. That's linked to biological imperative. And, interesting, biological imperative. I wonder if there's a connection between biological imperative and queerness, right? I would have maybe never thought that question before. But because of the proximity of these connections, suddenly I'm thinking about it. Interesting. And if I go into biological imperative, which is a tag, then there's all of these other tags. And so the graph becomes a really interesting way for, again, just serendipity and fun little rabbit holes within the things that you are collecting. I wanted to just finish off by talking about tags before I kind of like close out. Tags are really powerful because tags are really the only property that connects all of the objects. It's a universal property. And so it's a really interesting way to see all of your information in one place. So, like, for example, I have in the last month or so separated all of my forms of media into separate containers, separate objects: courses, film and TV, books, poems. However, to me, those are all source notes, right? And so I started tagging them with source. And so even though they are their own object, I'm able to also go in and see them all together through the source note tag. In the same way, I have things related to Japan in many different objects. And because I've tagged them all with Japanese, I'm able to click on this and see all of the objects because I've decided to group them by object type. I'm able to see them kind of separately all together in a really, really interesting way. You can see that I have a lot of books related to Japan. Um, and as well as a lot of definitions and the like. And then I have mentions because, like I mentioned earlier, no pun intended, or excuse the redundancy. Unlinked mentions is really, really powerful. So every single time that I've said the word Japanese or written the word Japanese, that also shows up here, even if it's not linked or tagged. So that's another really interesting thing. So, like, for example, if I go into my Luffy character note, you'll see that because I have an alias for Luffy, there's a mention here where I haven't linked to him, a little comment on episode 1001 that shows up here that I could have lost if not for the fact that these mentions show up here. And again, it's a really fun way to kind of like have this serendipity. If I go into my spiral note, you'll see that I have a research task, look into the history of spiral as a symbol. And I also have all of these mentions of the word spiral in various annotations that I have collected. They're not linked, but they're showing up in mentions. And so this is another one of those pro features that to me is really, really important for my practice. And this is a natural thing. It's not something that I had to set up at all. It's something that just happens naturally when you're in the pro tier. And I think that's all I needed to share on how to get started when it comes to the technical aspects of capacities. However, going back to our very simple initial start, I wanted to share just some tips on how to get started before you even start creating objects and the like. Is first of all, think about what it is that you want to save in your space. What is the purpose behind what you want to create? Do you want to collect quotes? Do you want to track your media the media that you're consuming? Are you looking to create databases? Are you just wanting a place for interstitial journaling, for capturing different statistics about your day? Are you wanting it for research? Are you wanting it to collect lyrics? Do you want to track the history of the world? Right? What is the purpose for which you are wanting to create either a system in capacities or really any PKM? Getting kind of like clear on what it is you want to do will help you to decide on what objects to create first. And then there is this saying, this quote that Nick Milo has that we say often in the Linking Your Thinking community: structure is earned. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the ways that I treat my properties now is through trial and error. I have these monthly videos that I go through every single month on this channel, and I have a few in my previous one that are collaborations at this point, so you can still access them through my channel page, where I go through and I share all of the system changes that I made in my capacity space, prior to that in my Obsidian space. And the reason I like sharing those when it's about the system changes and not so much about the notes I created is to show the experimental nature and the aliveness of the system itself. Don't create objects to create objects because you think you might need them. Create them as you need them, right? As I showed you with the basic object types, I didn't create images until I decided, oh, I want to actually input an image into here, and then that was created. That's a natural thing that happens with basic object types, but the idea stands for custom object types as well. If you are not sure that you want to keep brand names in your capacities, don't create a brand's names object before you even want to create one, right? That's a really niche example. But if you don't know if you want to keep places or locations or even quotes, right? Like if you don't want to keep those things, or you don't know if you do, don't create it beforehand. Just wait to see what comes up as you continue to make notes. Don't be afraid to use the daily note as a hub for all of your fleeting ideas, for the things that you come up with. Oh, I have this idea. Oh, I think I can do this. I have a PKM log tag that keeps track of all of those little thoughts that I have on potential system changes. I go through that in those videos that I mentioned before. And that's a way for me to kind of like say, okay, I think I have this idea, but not necessarily go and do it, right? I can go back and kind of see what this idea was and say, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. But kind of using your daily note as an inbox, in which I do have a video about that too, I'll leave it linked up above, is a great way for you to start off kind of like figuring out, okay, these are the things that I want to collect, right? These are the things that are kind of interesting me. And then you go back and you kind of like review all your daily notes and say, oh, I'm seeing that I'm capturing a lot about like people. I'm capturing a lot of information about people. I'm going to create a person object, right? And so just trying to think about that and what it is that you want to do will really help you to not over structure before you even make notes to begin with, right? And then another tip that I have is if you are going to create an object, before you do that, kind of try and see what information you're gonna want to collect on that object, and see if you don't already have one that can kind of serve that purpose. And a really good example of that would be books and media. There are some people who read a lot more books than they do anything else, and they want to have a separate database, so they have those separate. However, for some people, it makes more sense to have all of their media in one object. I've done both of those things and I've experimented with both. And at this point in time, I decided that I do like having them separate, but I did start with having all of them together. And as I continued to create more notes and see, how I'm feeling and seeing if there's any tensions that are coming up or frictions that are coming up, I decided, hey, actually, I do prefer having these separate. And then I can use a tag to see them all together if I ever need to, right? And so just keep that in mind as well. If there are certain objects that could potentially, that you're wanting to have the same properties for, maybe consider putting them under one object type and perhaps renaming it. And if that doesn't feel right, then just create the object. Like I showed in the video, it's very easy for you to switch them. So don't let that kind of like stop you either. Don't be afraid to make objects and then condense objects and then make them again. Experiment, have fun. I talk a lot about where does the U in PKM go. And I think that videos like this are important. Showing you how it is that I structure my system is important for inspiration. I know that I love seeing how other systems works, how they think, but your thinking style is yours alone. It's as unique as your fingerprint. And so the way that I keep information, the way that I interact with that information is not the same as how you do that. And so, yes, take what I say and integrate it, take what you like, leave the rest, go forth and have fun. Find the special sauce that only you can bring to your capacity space or your PKM space, whatever that is, and let that develop into something else. Anyways, that's all from me for this video. I'm sure that I may have left something out. If there are any additional questions or you want me to expand on anything, please let me know in the description. I will make videos. And then if you are interested in trying out Capacities Pro, you can use my link for a 30-day trial to try out those features. I do think that even without paying for the pro features, there's a lot of greatness in the Capacities system. And for me, it's been really interesting to see how using it has changed the way that I think about my thinking and has helped me realize certain things that I really enjoy about my thinking. So I hope that you'll give it a try if you have been on the fence. I'm really hopeful that this video will be useful to you if you've been kind of trying to figure out how to use Capacities. And yeah, that's it from me. I'll catch you guys in the next video.